a crisis right now when it comes to immigration. And most people don't know the history of immigration and the fact that our country had zero legal immigration for decades because of the instability of the times and many of the things that were going on, that it was not unusual for our government to say, we are not accepting any immigration right now because of whatever it was that we had to deal with. And the one thing that you should have all learned is that if they can do something in a time of crisis that they couldn't otherwise do, they're going to create crises to do those things they wouldn't otherwise be able to do. That's the whole point of Operation Gladio, is the consistent crises that gets created in order to go overthrow governments or to create the crisis terror event like 9/11 so they can pass a law that strips us of all of our rights. So if you give in to this during a crisis, they will continue to have a crisis in order to make you give in. So I'm done playing their game. I'm not a fan of reindeer games. So to me, if you are genuinely interested in solving a problem that you tell me we have, first of all, do you notice none of them ever use statistics? None of them. How many jobs require some training or education that we currently don't produce? How many? What's the number? There has to be a number. What is the education that is required of those numbers? So if you tell me that you need electrical engineers, okay, how many do you need? How many do we produce? What's the deficit? And why is there not more? What's the barrier to entry into that? Because all day long, people have been posting on X about the fact that they know this person, this entire school. They have graduating classes that they cannot get placed into a job because they are having to compete with people coming in from overseas. And then one of the other aspects of that is the people coming in from overseas, the companies get a tax credit if they hire them versus an American. So how is that's not a level playing field. And so none of the people want to talk about this. And quite frankly, I was shocked at the level of honesty of Vivek, especially telling me that we have a culture problem. Well, maybe we have a culture problem because our culture has been under attack for about the last 70 years by people whose last name starts with Rockefeller or Soros or any of these other people that have done everything, to include the CIA, by the way, to destroy our culture. And his big example is that you basically cannot have prom queens and sports jocks and produce superior academics people. Our emphasis are in the wrong place. Well, for years prior to the onslaught of attacks on America from the inside, we didn't have a problem leading technology innovation. We didn't have a problem with having prom queens and smart people at the same time. We didn't have a problem winning wars. We didn't have a problem with being able to balance more than one thing at a time. But now all of a sudden, we have a problem with that. And I just find the whole thing laughable. And I'm not going to shut up. I'm not going to accept the fact that someone is telling us without any numbers at all, no statistics as to what the shortfall is. And like I pointed out, if you've been a billionaire for, I don't know, decades, and you are in an industry that has some unique need, and you sought citizenship in the United States of America to create that company, you have an obligation in your new host country to create the intellect in order to feed that US based company. No one said that you can come here and then create a company that demands some foreigners, and then you get to change our entire immigration policies and claim emergencies to change those policies to feed your industry. Why did you not go to India to create your industry, since Vivek seems to think that that's where all the smart people are? Why didn't you go there? Why are you even in America? Um, those are the kind of things that they're not racist to talk about. And if you give me numbers and you give me a plan, because see, this is what gets us into these problems. Remember in the 1980s, because I do, when illegal immigration was a problem, and I'm not equating the two, so don't even go there. But we were told that illegal immigration was out of control and it was a problem. And the way we were going to solve it is we were going to do two things simultaneously. We were going to grant amnesty to all of the lawbreakers and illegals, while at the same time we were going to secure the border. Well, you know what they did? They created that crisis. They got their amnesty and this entire new generation of voting people, while at the same time not closing our border. And now here we are at another crisis point. And not that we haven't been at a crisis point in a long time, because we have. We're spending hundreds of billions of dollars on illegal people, and they're basically here killing us and basically inflating the prices and all this other stuff. And yeah, don't tell me about them picking my vegetables. I pick my own vegetables. So those types of crises are created in order to get us to do something that we wouldn't ordinarily do. And I'm done playing that game. I want to know what it is that you need and what is your plan to meet those needs inside the walls of the United States, because you have to have one. And also about the creating schools. Well, supposedly those are filled with only leftists can do that. Only leftists can infiltrate school systems and create new school systems in this current environment, which, by the way, is bullshit. They definitely know how to do that. They know how to take over education systems. But you guys heard from Isabella the other day where she and a small group of people single-handedly took over the third largest school district in America. So those things can be done and should be done. While at the same time, I led an effort in my local community when I found out that Jeff Bezos had this Bezos Academy. And when someone first told me about it, I laughed. I was like, what the hell is that? That's never coming to Polk County. We're like the reddest county in Florida. We have Grady Judd as our sheriff. There's no way Jeff Bezos is going to have a school here. So I went to a meeting that with our school superintendent, and I listened to the man tell an entire group of people, there was probably 100 people in the room, that he had a meeting and had approved Jeff Bezos Academy coming to Polk County, and that it was going to occupy a half-empty school. So it was going to cost us nothing, except for that was a lie. Because once you start utilizing a classroom, you've accelerated the repair plus the electric and all that other crap, which is just common sense. But his very next topic, after congratulating himself on getting Jeff Bezos free DEI stacked academy for like 3-year-olds into Polk County because it's like 3 through 5. It's a pre-kindergarten kind of thing. He goes on to tell us how in the next year, this was like a year ago, so sometime during this year, they were going to undergo redistricting and that they were going to look at basically redrawing school lines and realigning people because some schools were overcrowded and others were not. And so I stood up and I said, I don't know about anybody else in here, but I just heard you say that you gave away half a school to a billionaire who could buy all of Polk County schools with the stroke of a pen. The year before, you are going to redistrict and reallocate empty classroom spaces. So is this only for this year that you're allowing him to be in that half empty school? Because after redistricting next year, that won't be a half empty school anymore. So how long was the contract that you've already signed? Oh, well, blah, 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 in like 5 minutes of backpedaling, he said that he'd need to get back to me on that. So I gave my name and number. He did not ever get back to me on that, by the way. I wrote to all of the school district, the school board members. I only ever heard back from one. And I also found out, because I have him on tape. I taped the entire meeting. I also found out it was a bold-faced lie because when I called the school board the next day and asked them to see the contract, I was told that there was no contract. He had not even contracted with Jeff Bezos' Academy yet while he stood in front of parents and teachers and lied about it. And so this is, to me, the problem. If Jeff Bezos can try to capture our pre-kindergarten kids with free education and the parents allow their children under this free education to be indoctrinated with DEI level curriculum. And I did write to the superintendent of schools in Florida because we outlawed DEI curriculum, and yet the curriculum not only was not produced by a educational authority. If you look up the Jeff Bezos Academy, it was produced by a marketing person that worked for Jeff Bezos. He had not a stitch of education background. Not that that even matters because it's so screwed up at this point anyway. But to add salt to the injury, it was a marketing salesperson that was drawing up the curriculum to educate 3-year-olds with DEI curriculum, and Florida has done absolutely nothing about ensuring that those people do not occupy taxpayer buildings and that it is not a recognized curriculum for the state of Florida. They've still not done anything on that. So again, I say all of that just to say I've done my homework in this area. I know this entire quote unquote crisis is bullshit, and I'm not going to shut up. So that's an introduction to the, oh my gosh, it's so crazy. So I have a couple of books that I want to do this one book that is called President's Secret War. I'm not going to do it as extensively as some of the books that I do because I have a really, really interesting book that I also want to get to. So I'm going to, again, this is just a very good source of names and places that I think you will find very interesting because this book starts off with, it's done in sections. And the first section is about the Cold War. And the first chapter within I mean, it's actually technically the second chapter, but the first one just basically outlines the Cold War in kind of generic way and how they set it up. But the second chapter of this first section is the secret war against Russia. And I find that extremely timely for what is going on. And they talk about things in the early 1900s leading up to the world wars. And many of the initiatives that you and I would not normally, well, we would not have been taught this in class, obviously, but we would not have even known it had people not gone back and did the research to be able to bring this to us. And so I definitely want to highlight that. And I also just, again, it's so interesting to me that Operation Gladio is talked about so often in these books that if we didn't know what it was, we would have skipped right over it. Like, I just want to highlight a couple of things. One of the, like, and I'll get to this in due course, but I just want to read this to you. I'm quoting out of the book. It's talking about covert operations and how the CIA had been set up with the National Security Act to do it. And they're talking about a guy by the name of the General Counsel Lawrence Houston. And it says, Houston did support one intelligence function already being performed that was related to covert operations. This was, quote, acquisition of extensive indication on plans in Western Europe for the establishment of resistance elements in the event of further extension of communist control, unquote. Now, what could that possibly be? Resistant elements. Those are stay-behind units, including information on the training of agent groups, radio operators, and their outside contacts. That is the Operation Gladio cells, remember? Because they all had weapons and they had the common radios. For secret propaganda and paramilitary missions, which is exactly what Operation Gladio is. Houston felt new offices could have been established, entailing the procurement of huge quantities of all kinds of material involving large sums of money for expenses. The memo then declared that, quote, we believe this would be an unauthorized use of funds that had been appropriated and made available to the CIA, unquote, therefore driving a need for black money and black operations. If such operations were ordered by the NSC, Houston concluded, it would, we feel, still be necessary to go to Congress and ask for authority and funds. And so this is the legal guy at the very beginning of setting up the CIA. And so you see immediately how the people involved in setting up the CIA were being told that what they were doing, number one, was not legal. But number two, if they were doing it, they couldn't use appropriated funds. And so now you understand why the phone call from Paul Helliwell, having watched Chiang Kai-shek over in China, is crucial to the whole story of how we're going to get covert funds to operate our covert operations. And we're going to do that by selling drugs. And so this guy, and let me just tell you the name. The name of the book again is President's Secret Wars, CIA and Pentagon Covert Operations Since World War II. And the guy's name is John Prados, Prados. And so I don't want to spend a whole lot of time in his summation of the Cold War, because we know that much of the reasoning for setting up Operation Gladio as a barrier to communism was all fake and gay. So I do want to make a couple of highlights because this theme runs through this book, which I found fascinating, and Bridget's going to find it fascinating too. He starts off the very first chapter of the first section of the book. The men in the yard carried submarine guns. They did not threaten, but only asked for food. The German farmer gave them some and they left. The sooner they were gone, then no sooner were they gone than the farmer reported the incident to local authorities. The police also received other reports of armed men in the woods along the Austrian, excuse me, Austrian border. So they go on to talk about how all of these people are in the woods in Austria and that they all seem very well equipped with guns and ammunition because they were part of the Stay Behind crew. They were also members of the Ukrainian and Croatian Stay Behind units that were trained by Otto Skorzeny, General Galen, and all of those in setting up the Stay Behind capacity during World War II. So the author, this is an actual quote, the United Press International reporter who went to Passau a few days after the incident got a garbled version of the truth, talking about some of the people in these roving bands had been captured. Said the prisoner had told the Army counterintelligence they were anti-Soviet partisans from Ukraine. But there were other speculations that they could have been from a portion of Poland, which kind of is a moot point because Ukraine, what is today Ukraine and what they called Ukraine back then, was a combination of Eastern Poland and Western Russia. So that may be a distinction without a difference right there. But it says detailed information on the Eastern European was an intelligence windfall for the US, talking about these Ukrainians and Croatians during the war. And so you remember what I discovered with the World Anti-Communist League and how that was completely made up of criminals from Eastern Europe, in the European sector, that is, that had committed gross war crimes to include skinning people alive, like horrific war crimes. And here they are just roaming around in the woods in Germany. Makes complete sense when you know the entire scope of what we're dealing with. And that's why I'm saying if you've not read all of these books and you can't put all of this in context, reading this book, some people are going to read that and go, that sounds too far-fetched to be true. But we can corroborate it by the other 5 books that we've read about this exact same thing. And so it says Washington saw the data being gathered from these Ukrainian, Ustasi, Croatian people as extremely valuable because it was, quote unquote, behind the lines of the Soviet Union. And it says the intelligence on the Ukrainian partisans signaled to American officials a chance to take secret military action against Russia. Now, again, we're in the immediate aftermath of the war with a country that had been our ally that suddenly, at the flip of a switch, has become an enemy. The Ukrainian movement offered the opening for an offensive move in the Cold War, a classic covert operation that would engage intelligence and psychological warfare. And the author notes that World War II was crucial in many different ways, which is kind of the point that I've been making the entire time. It changed everything. The US found its British allies to be avid practitioners of secret warfare. And he goes on to describe what we already know as the Special Operations Executive, the SOE, as well as the Jedburgh units, and basically how the Wild Bill Donovan had worked with the SOE Jedburgh units in Britain throughout the Mediterranean, so Northern Europe, Burma, and China, which kind of is going to go into the second book that we're going to do after this one. Because he talks about how these same units, which they're talking about Gladio, were found in Burma and the Balkans and northern Italy. So we can definitely confirm that. He goes on to talk about the armies. This is an expeditionary temporary army unit. It was called 5307th Composite Unit. It was also known as Morell's Marauders and played an important part in the Burma campaign alongside the OSS. The OSS unit with the same name, with the same mission, was called Detachment 101. They were originally sent to India and infiltrated the Burmese hill country and basically was there supporting the relocation of much of Chiang Kai-shek's KMT military, his army. So it says that the OSS officers established local espionage networks and roving patrol of fighters into organized guerrilla units and basically worked alongside the British Shindik, which is CHINDIT brigades, and that they also had 10,000 other forces, which, if you read other accounts, is basically Chiang Kai-shek's KMT army that was relocated there. And it says that they worked first to evict the Japanese from those locations, and then were used in Burma as an occupation force for protection of what's going to be the phase 2 of the opium movement out of southern China on behalf of Chiang Kai-shek. So it says the OSS also participated in the European theater with commando raids, dropping in resistance fighters, setting up the precursor of the Normandy invasion, and that the OSS, British SOE, and French intelligence all contributed to form 90 three-man teams referred to in Britain as Jedburgh units. And they basically were the precursor to Operation Gladio units. Jedburghs were parachuted in military uniform but carried civilian clothes in order to be able to switch roles at a moment's notice. The resistance operations are credited with slowing down the German response to many different situations. And it also says that the Army's counterintelligence operated a parallel program to the Jedburgh units in northern Italy, and they found it particularly effective in Italy. The surrender of Japan in August 1945 brought a scramble to demobilize all of this capability. The OSS had built itself up to a strength of 12,000 people. And parts of the OSS that had dealt with the analytical intelligence capability moved over to the State Department when President Truman signed the order to get rid of the OSS. The clandestine officers went to the War Department as a new unit called the Strategic Services Unit under Brigadier General John Magruder, who had been the OSS Special Warfare Chief. So Magruder mandate was not to preserve or enlarge the SSU, but he originally had been told it was going to be dismantled. Excuse me. Former OSS officers who had served with the Jedburghs and elsewhere went back to their homes, to law practices, to school, or some of them went back to their former Army jobs. Teams from the OSS SSU were pulled out of Vietnam, where ironically, they had worked side by side with Ho Chi Minh and advised him on helping him get the Japanese out of Vietnam. In addition to the SSU, the Army Counterintelligence Corps remained as a clandestine operations center and eventually becomes the G2 of the Army. So, given the role of the official intelligence branch in the Army, they were best situated during this transition time in order to be able to provide the quote unquote intelligence necessary, but not necessarily the clandestine piece of this. Later investigations revealed a number of items that might have alerted members to the attack on Pearl Harbor in 1941, but it was fed to us as an intelligence breakdown, which is what they were going to use to get the American people to approve a Central Intelligence Agency, where, of course, many people have uncovered many pieces of the lead up to Pearl Harbor and believe that it was a known event to the U.S. government, and that whether or not it was done to get us into the war, to lead us to the next step and the next step and the next step, you can argue that. I'm not going to make that claim. What I am going to say is it's unequivocally true that the Pearl Harbor attack was led directly to the creation of a Central Intelligence Agency, because if you go back and you read a lot of the articles that were written about it, it was cited repeatedly as the reason why we have to have the Central Intelligence Agency. But I kind of liken that to the same false justification of it's just another example of them creating an emergency in order for them to implement something that they're going to do anyway, but they have to have an emergency in order to get us to go along. So I'm highly encouraging us not to listen to anybody that tries to make things an emergency that clearly are not an emergency. Okay, so they get to the part where President Truman sets up the Joint Chiefs of Staff and he creates the National Intelligence Authority to oversee what was initially called a Central Intelligence Group, the CIG. And the National Intelligence Authority was supposed to be the Secretaries of State, Secretary of the War Department, and the Secretary of Navy. So Truman was also going to have a representative on there that they were going to call the Director of Central Intelligence, who ran the Central Intelligence Group. And so the first guy that was selected to do this was a guy by the name of Sidney Sauer, Souers. Now, this guy was a businessman. He had a commission in the Navy as a rear admiral, and he had participated in naval intelligence. So he was not interested in having that job long term. He did say that he would take the job initially, but only stayed in it a few months. Army Chief of Staff General Dwight D. Eisenhower then recommended one of his top Pentagon planners to take that job, and that was General Charles Bonesteel, Bonesteel. But Truman instead selected General Hoyt Vandenberg. Vandenberg Air Force Base is named after this guy. The president felt Vandenberg knew the job and was a diplomat that would get along with state, war, and Navy departments. Vandenberg had been a combat commander. His intelligence experience was very limited. But they were located next door to the White House, and he started off with about 250 people in the organization, and they were supposed to only do research and evaluation of intelligence that was gathered elsewhere and basically come up with like a national intelligence estimate for the president. But by the end of 1946, there were 800 people in just one part of the organization. And the entire organization ended up with 1,800 people just like a year later. And then by 1947, when we stand up the CIA, there had been over 3,000 people in there. And you have basically, this was set up out of whole cloth. There was no basis in any law for the executive office to have this organization. And I love this part. It says, already several bills had been proposed in Congress, and the White House had held discussions with the Central Intelligence Group lawyers in 1946. And you'll never guess who helped draft the legislation to set up the intelligence agency. Clark M. Clifford. Clark M. Clifford, the same guy that falsely, illegally helped BCCI, the CIA's fake bank that supposedly was from Pakistan, that was actually operated out of London and the UAE and Luxembourg, which is where it was registered. So Clark Clifford helps draft the legislation to set up the CIA. And then several years later is the guy that's helping the CIA's fake bank, BCCI, buy illegally 3 American banks in the United States as their lawyer. It just is crazy. These people's name just comes up over and over again. So Truman created the National Security Council in 1947 as part of this Clark Clifford drafted law to advise him on defense and foreign affairs, and basically merged the War and Navy departments into a Department of Defense, which also set up a Department of Air Force under the Department of Defense for the first time. So Congress basically centered on their debate on the whole thing, centered on whether or not there should be any type of quote unquote secret police. Congressman noted that the lack of detail in the bill regarding the intelligence organization did not prohibit it from accumulating police powers. So the legislation was then amended to prohibit the CIA from possessing any police powers. Also, Congress specified in the proposed legislation new responsibilities for the Central Intelligence Agency. Congress went back to Truman in January 1946, establishing establishing the National Intelligence Authority and the Central Intelligence Group. Under the National Security Act, the CIA was directly answerable, because this was a subsequent act, the one that Clifford helped write, was directly answerable to the president through the National Security Council. The National Intelligence Authority was abolished. So understand this, because this point is crucial to what we're going through right now. The CIA is directly answerable to the president through the National Security Council. And who's in charge of the National Security Council? The National Security Advisor. And who was Trump's National Security Advisor? General Flynn. Now, do you understand why the CIA had to set him up and take him out? Because again, he knows where all the bodies are buried, and they had to answer to him. They couldn't hoodwink him. That's the reason why it was imperative that he had to go. So, according to this new legislation, the CIA had 5 functions: advising the National Security Council on intelligence. Well, you have to gather intelligence in order to be able to advise on it, and that's not what they do. Making recommendations as it relates to intelligence, producing intelligence estimates and reports, and then they have this performing additional services of common concern for the government intelligence needs. And then also this catch-all, performing such other functions and duties related to intelligence affecting the national security as the National Security Council may from time to time direct. And that's the crux of the covert operation. And that's the reason why in all of the ones that we've looked at, the National Security Council, which is where the Iran-Contra was ran from, the war in Angola that Reagan got involved in, all of that was ran out of the National Security Council. Well, if you've got a guy like General Flynn that's going to be the National Security Advisor, that shit ain't going to happen. And that's why it's imperative that you go back and look at every single National Security Advisor that we've had. They are a linchpin in every Operation Gladio / covert operation that the United States has ever been involved in. Because until we got to the, like, around the late 80s, early 90s, when Bush Sr. was in charge, and they had kind of fully fleshed out the enterprise, which is kind of the off books version of the CIA, which there's definitely direct links, especially with Bush, to that organization as well. But that organization would not have had to, because it's non-existent to any chain of command, it would not have necessarily had to report to the National Security Council for directions. We have found things through Kissinger and Brzezinski that indicates that was still an existing courtesy that was done when the people that were operating in the enterprise, which by the way is a private version, off the books version of the CIA. But you can see by that, this evolution of how the CIA was created and the chain of command, why having someone like a General Flynn as the National Security Advisor would be a no-go for these people. In later years, the provision of that catch-all phrase to do covert operations was said to furnish the legal authority to do secret warfare by the CIA. It should be noted, therefore, that the terms covert operation, clandestine operation, paramilitary operation, secret operation, and special operation were all euphemisms for a secret warfare appear nowhere in the law that authorizes a peacetime intelligence agency. It is all captured under a catch-all, quote, such other functions, unquote. And there is no indication that Congress had any idea initially what was going to be included in that. President Truman signed the legislation in 1947, and the National Security Act became law. 6 weeks later, the Central Intelligence Group became the Central Intelligence Agency, and the CIA began expanding their own organization and roles and missions in a way that was never foreseen. And it also would include some of those Ukrainian partisans that was running around in the woods that we talked about originally, because the Ukrainians were looking for help. And the help that they were looking for, of course, is the fake narrative that they were a actual country inside of the Soviet Union, as opposed to part of Russia that had been segregated out as part of World War II map drawing, which at the time didn't matter to the Soviet Union because it was inside the Soviet Union. It would be like saying, one of the states here in Florida, in the middle of some conflict, like try Hawaii, declares their independence from the United States. It really doesn't matter to the United States if they are still basically part of the United States legally. They can say whatever they want. And of course, the Soviet Union had an occupation army in Ukraine because it was part of Russia. So they weren't really worried about where a world boundary got drawn at the time. So he goes on to talk about that the Soviet Joseph Stalin persisted in an obsession with defending the borders of Russia through the device of a buffer zone that basically consisted of Soviet-dominated nations. And so it was critical to Stalin to have what appeared to be separate nations along their border, because that was going to be the kind of the defense, like the DMZ for Russia proper. So it really didn't matter to them at the time. One milestone of sorts occurred in early 1946. By this time, troops garrisoned in Iran under a joint occupation arrangement were to be withdrawn. The deadline came and passed with Russian soldiers still in the country. Stalin did finally evacuate after some blunt language from Truman, who explained to his Secretary of State, James Burns, "I'm tired of babysitting the Soviets." That was a quote. The Iran crisis proved a watershed for public opinion in the U.S. British wartime Prime Minister Winston Churchill received a standing ovation at Westminster College in Missouri when he declared in a speech only a few days after the Iranian deadline, quote, "From Stetson to the Baltic to Taris in the Adriatic, an iron curtain has descended across the continent. Behind the line lie all of the capitals of the ancient states of Central and Eastern Europe, all subject in one form or another, not only to the Soviet influence, but to a very high and in some cases increasingly measure of control from Moscow." And the Lend-Lease aid that had been set aside for Truman, which the Americans had provided to Russia since 1941, basically became an issue for these people. And it says the Soviets were interested in extending it, but Truman halted it. And that Stalin and the British leaders at Potsdam, Germany, during 1945 had a discussion about it, where they talked of the arrangements of Eastern Europe and the operation of Allied control councils in the occupied countries, which were garrisoned until peace treaties could be signed with each individual country. After the top-level meeting summit, and over the next 2 years, the U.S. would not again meet the Soviets at a summit until 1955. Another diplomatic device available was the Council of Foreign Ministers, which was a negotiating group that was composed of secretaries of state from the U.S., Soviet Union, Britain, and France. They met periodically, and the foreign ministers discussed repeatedly Asian and European questions. They talked about peace treaties for Hungary, Romania, and Bulgaria with participation that had participated in World War II. At the end of 1947, a conference ended with no accords at all. Even negotiations for a peace treaty with Austria was broken off by May of 1948. Stalin bears some responsibility for what happened. The Soviet dictator had a secret he dared not divulge. The Russia laid shattered. Despite appearances, Soviet prisoners and forced laborers repatriated at the end of the war faced death and long years of detention and often merely exchanged German work for Russian work. Unlike the US, Russia's economy was so devastated that it could not absorb the mass of people returning, so Stalin moved slowly on post war demobilization, retaining large forces of armed forces, including troops who manned occupation zones in Germany and Austria and throughout Eastern European nations, because to do otherwise would have illustrated to the world the devastation inside of the Soviet Union. They had 27 million people that were killed in World War II. They were literally devastated, which again kind of flies in the face of the rhetoric that we've been led to believe. And it's not that the US government didn't know this, they were very much aware of the fact that the Soviet Union was devastated, manpower wise, which is kind of the irony of Operation Gladio in and of itself, because we were told that it was formed at the beginning of the in the aftermath of World War II for the fear that the communists were going to come over the Volga Gap and decimate all of Europe. They literally had nobody to do that with. 27 million people killed. They took the brunt of the death of all of World War II. So Europe and the United States knew unequivocally that there was not a physical threat. Now, you can make an argument that there were people that advocated communism as a alternative to a form of government, because you can definitely make that case. But to say that it was a military threat at that point, with the United States not actually deactivating its military and staying as an occupying force throughout Europe for, I don't know, still today, you really can't make that argument from a physical standpoint. Okay. So it says, on Stalin's orders, Soviet diplomats and military authorities disrupted the functioning of many of the efforts that the West made in dealing with war reparations, and because they were trying to impose certain requirements on the Soviet Union in the areas that they occupied that they couldn't afford, where the US was basically loaning money, printing money, and doing whatever it is that they were doing to provide the military aid to the Europeans, so that all of they could all collectively do and keep on par at a much faster pace than what they knew the Soviet Union could do. And so the Soviet Union was looked at constantly as not participating, when in fact they couldn't, because they didn't have the resources to do it. In Germany's authorities in the American zone, they suspended all deliveries of reparations in, excuse me, in May of 1946. The U.S. must also take some of the blame for this Cold War stalemate. From the beginning of his administration, Harry Truman proved more eager to use muscle in relations with Soviet Union than his predecessor had, FDR. Historians still debate whether Truman threatened the Russians with an atomic bomb on which the U.S. then had a monopoly, especially in connection with forcing the Soviets to evacuate Iran in 1946. There are people, and I have read that myself, that believe that that threat was made, that if they didn't get out of the Iran, that they were going to bomb them. I don't know that that's true, because there are differing opinions of that. Only a few months later, the president dispatched major American naval force to the Mediterranean for the first time in response to the Soviet pressure on Turkey for a joint defense agreement. The suspension of reparations from Germany also had a coercive and punitive character. France caused problems as well. It had been allocated occupation zones in both Germany and Austria and seats on the Allied Control Council as part of the Big Four. The Americans had already intended to administer each of the occupied countries as a single economic unit, but the French were concerned that the Soviet policies might come to dominate. The French representatives accordingly vetoed moves that the Allied Control Council designed to unify an economic administration of the different zones. As a result, in July 1946, the Americans offered to join their occupation zone in Germany with those of other powers willing to participate. That the Russians suspected that they were being entrapped by both the French and the British, but then the French decides they don't like the deal either, and only the British and the US were willing to do it together. And so they collectively reorganized into what was called a hybrid entity called Bizonia, Bizonia, which created a new currency to basically rebuild the Europe that they were in control over. Even more in transient, the Soviet armies consolidated their presence in Eastern European nations rather than withdrawing. And after the peace treaties of Hungary, Romania, and Bulgaria, the Soviet troops stayed in place. Russian diplomats walked out of a meeting of the Foreign Council of Ministers. The Soviet-American relationships basically kind of hit rock bottom in 1947 when the British told American officials that they would be forced to terminate the foreign aid to Greece at the end of March. Europe faced a cruel winter, and the British government could not continue to support Greece. Now, those of you who've been with me for a long time understand what happened in Greece. It wasn't that they couldn't afford to stay in Greece. The British had basically ceded stay-behind capacities in Greece, and they were trying to control, basically set up a post-World War II Western NATO-friendly government in Greece, and they were running into a large-scale amount of resistance, and they wanted the US to help. And so basically the British kind of bow out, and the US goes in and takes over for the British. And it says an added aid to Turkey for good measure, because a longstanding issue with Cyprus in the fact that Greece and Turkey both had claimed control over Cyprus. And so you couldn't leave Turkey out of the whole consideration of basically trying to occupy Greece and facilitate the resistant fighters, the Greek nationalists that did not want an occupation force, whether it the British or the Americans. But at the end of the day, the Americans were successful in putting down and putting in their own goon squad there. And you guys know that eventually you have the overthrow of the Greek government that had basically been installed, and the council of the five colonels, one of which was Papadopoulos, no relation, he told me. But Greece had been, it's been a mess since, because we kept trying to destabilize it. So also it says that a marked shift in Truman's policy toward the active stance of countering Soviet moves, the aid itself was not ultimately an important as much as the change in strategy. Under a new concept, Soviet power was to be, quote unquote, contained, as George Kennan articulated and coined the word containment as part of the Truman Doctrine. From the initial aid to Greece and Turkey, it was but a short step to offer foreign aid more widely to European nations. So, Secretary of State George Marshall made an offer in a commencement address at Harvard in 1947. The Marshall Plan was intended to further contain by helping rebuild the European economies and eliminate any social conditions that would afford a toehold in the growth of communism. And we would refer to that because this is their intervention in 1948 in the Italian election, where you had the two candidates, one pro NATO, the other one not necessarily. They call him a communist and he's sympathetic. He won't rule out the fact that he'd allow communists in his party. So he has to basically not win elections. And we spent at least 5 million. Some people say it was closer to $20 million interfering with the Italian election in 1948 as a result of that. And this is literally the linchpin of creating the narrative that's going to be used for the next 70 years. Well, not 70. It would have been from 48 to 91 that the communist has to be stopped. And the Marshall Plan, what you find out when you dig into the Marshall Plan, supposedly it was an economic plan, but the people that were administering it are the exact same people that played a leading role in Operation Gladio. And there is a lot of evidence that suggests the Marshall Plan was the jump starting to the covert operations that we found throughout Europe, but didn't have the money necessary to begin when they needed to begin, which was immediately, because they want to start interfering with elections to make sure that they can get all of Europe into NATO. So they don't have total control over the opium flow to have all of the Black Ops funds generated yet. So they needed an immediate source of money in order to effect the control and buy weapons and do all that other stuff. Which of course they did using arms dealers and excess arms throughout all of Europe, to include the Soviet Union, because they were strapped for cash too. And so there's this large post-war arms network that was set immediately into operation. And there is a strong argument that a lot of the Marshall Plan money actually went to creating that network, not necessarily exclusively to economic aid. And then it says the Soviet leaders were not mistaken by believing that Truman and the Marshall Plan was designed to be used against them. Stalin forbade participation in the Marshall Plan by the occupied Western European countries. The Czechs, whose political system had not yet been under the control of the Russians, saw the Marshall Plan aid as a counterweight to Soviet influence and initially responded favorably. It is likely that their reaction served as a catalyst for Stalin's decision to consolidate control of Prague. By February 1948, a sort of constitutional coup had been carried out. Non-communist ministers in the Czech coalition government resigned to be replaced by representatives of the minority party, the Czech Communist Party. Within a month, a famous Czech patriot, Jan Masaryk, a prominent politician and government official, died under very mysterious circumstances. These events in Czechoslovakia, plus a rising tide of war scare from the American side, created a volatile situation. The American High Commissioner, General Lucius D. Clay, cabled a warning on March 5th that war may come as a dramatic result of the events playing out. Asked for an opinion, the CIA prepared a memorandum concluding that war was in fact not imminent. It was in Germany that matters came to a head. The foreign ministers of the Big Three, now just the US, Britain, and France, had met in London. At the meeting, they said the Soviet delegates demanded to be informed about the London talks, and Allied representatives refused to even talk to them. The Russians suddenly informed the West that they would impose travel restrictions on 3 of the land corridors connecting the western sector of Berlin once the West decided not to talk to Russia at all. And the restrictions went into effect at midnight on April 1st. The British and American trains en route to Berlin were halted at the Soviet zone boundary. The Allies shifted to aircraft for transport. And then, of course, you have the famous Berlin airlift. And in July 1948, travel restrictions had developed into a full-scale blockade of Berlin, and that lasted until May 12, 1949. During that time, everything was carried into West Berlin by airlift. 80 tons the first day, and within a month, over 3,000 tons a day. During the course of the blockade, there were 733 incidences between the Soviets and Allied aircraft. 39 British, 31 American, and 5 German airmen were killed during that process. So at this point, there's a lot of friction, to say the least, and President Truman wanted to strike back at the Russians, and his intent was to use the CIA to do that. And he says from the creation of the CIA, it was caught up in different flows of which administration. So in the fall of 1947, the first Secretary of Defense, James Forrestal, asked the CIA if it would be capable of undertaking secret political action and paramilitary campaigns on behalf of the U.S. The agency replied that it could carry out anything that was assigned to them by the National Security Council, and if the resources were made available. The CIA at that time was building up their capabilities. And the newly assigned Director of Central Intelligence, Rear Admiral Roscoe Hillenkoetter, Hillenkoetter, was obviously out of the Navy, and basically had spent a lot of time trying to kind of fill out the complement of what he viewed the CIA mission was going to be all about. And it says that, but the CIA was not ready to take on any covert operations when initially asked. Plus, there were a lot of legal opinions that they lacked the authority to engage in them. So Admiral Hillenkoetter asked the CIA's legal counsel for his opinion. And that's the guy, Houston, that I read to you earlier. And he basically gave the opinion that there was that loophole. And in the published letter 35 years later, Houston recalled that Hillenkoetter expressed concern with his legal opinion. The DCI asked whether there were other considerations in the matter, whereupon the lawyer provided a second memorandum where Houston stated that if, quote, if the president, with his constitutional responsibilities for conducting foreign policy, gave the agency the appropriate instructions, and if Congress gave it the funds to carry them out, the agency has the legal capability of carrying out covert actions involved, unquote. Hillenkoetter then went to Truman with the problem. A proposal for secret propaganda was initiated for presidential consideration. In this connection, the State Department advised in December that the Soviet covert operations threatened to defeat American foreign policy objectives until the U.S. adopted similar measures. At the first meeting in December 13th, the National Security Council discussed a program for secret propaganda. The following day, President Truman signed National Security Council Directive 4/A, approving a secret propaganda program and assigning responsibility to the CIA. A week later, the CIA formed a special procedures group within the Office of Special Operations to carry out the propaganda mission. It's worth noting that these American decisions were made months before the Czech coup, not after it. So there was no predication from the Russians in order to do any of this. George Kennan's proposed the formation of a special studies group under the State Department's control to serve as an elite force in addition to the covert operations in the CIA. Since he was the department's senior policy planner, Kennan's views carried considerable weight. For their part, the Joint Chiefs of Staff also wanted basically a special operations caveat. In June 1948, President Truman resolved this matter by expanding the function not only of the CIA, but of the state and defense departments with the National Security Council as well, through a new directive called 10-2, which is very famous now, which he signed on June 18th. Truman included psychological operation warfare and paramilitary programs, which that was the first time any president had approved any governmental entity doing any paramilitary at all. And that was Truman, people. Both kinds of missions would be carried out by the new organization that would take an operational order from the CIA and its policy directions from a secret committee chaired by the Director of Central Intelligence. The committee was made up of a unit in the National Security Council and thus worked directly for the president. The group was composed of representatives from the Secretary of State and Defense. It was called the 10-2 panel. Now, we've come across more modern names of that, like the Council of 40 or Group of 40. There's lots of different names that has taken on over time. Under the panel, the 10-2 panel, funds for the new organization would be included in the budget of the CIA, while the director would be nominated by the Secretary of State and approved by the NSC. According to 10-2 directive, the overt foreign activities of the U.S. government must be supplemented by covert operations. Three features of the 10-2 directive were crucial to the post-war evolution of American covert operations. For the first time in a governmental decisional document, there appeared to be a mechanism designated by the president to approve and manage a secret operation and make them responsible to him. Second, for the first time, there appeared to be a comprehensive definition of what a covert operation was. And lastly, the CIA was again given primary responsibility for the covert mission area. Confirming the arrangement began in another memo. The new covert operations were to involve more than psychological warfare, even more than secret wars. The new definition specified that covert operations included all activities sponsored and conducted by the U.S. government, either in support of friendly governments or against hostile ones. That's how they interfered in the Italian election. With the stipulation that there be so planned and executed that any U.S. government responsibility in them was not evident. Plausible deniability. The U.S. government had to be able to claim plausible deniability. The core of the 10-2 definition explained, and I'm quoting, such operations shall include any covert activities related to propaganda, economic warfare, preventative direct action, including sabotage, anti-sabotage, demolition, and evacuation measures, subversion against hostile states, including assistance to underground resistant movements, guerrillas and refugee liberation groups, and support of indigenous anti-communist elements in threatened countries of the free world. Now, this last, 10 words is the most critical part of this as it relates to Operation Gladio. Support of indigenous anti-communist elements in threatened countries. Now you know why these fuckers went around calling everybody a communist? Because 10-2 directive said that if you designated somebody a communist, that it unleashed the full spectrum of covert operations as a result of that designation. Not that they actually had to be a communist, they just had to be designated as one. Virtually the only intelligence area left out of this definition was espionage, As far as warfare is concerned, the scale ranged up a level just short of armed conflict. The definition of covert operations contained in 10.2 endured for over 3 decades. It created a new Office of Special Projects to carry them out, which was later merged into the CIA. And that is the first segment of this. And you can see why, because the next segment is going to be the kind of the pivotal point of what they actually did in overt actions against Russia during this time, that I think kind of lays the groundwork for what we're observing today. Because most of the people, obviously in Russia, know all of the stuff that we're just now learning. So anyway, that's it. Bridget, what happened? I just saw your help. I sent it back to you. All right. Oh, shoot. I saw Dwayne in here earlier. I was hoping he stuck around. Okay. So if you guys want a mic and come up and talk, that's fine. We can talk about the book or whatever else you want to talk about.
I noticed early on, Colonel, that we got two familiar names involved in all of this stuff. One of them was General Singlov.
Yeah.
And the other one was Colby, the CIA director.
Yeah.
And of course they were in the war. Of course they were. That's where they say they always use the same freaking playbook. Sorry. It's just crazy to me that they do the same thing over and over and over again.
Well, I was actually shocked to find out that Clark Clifford drafted the National Security Act. That did shock me. Knowing what his ultimate role over the years were in Operation Gladio and the support of the CIA, it definitely makes sense. But I have to admit, I was shocked by that.
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely, each time we reveal these new facts, don't you think it colors in the picture a little bit?
It does. It does.
A little more clarity.
Yeah, and that's funny that you say that, because now that we know the names, when you read these new books with your Gladio glasses on and the names kind of safely cemented into the cracks and crevices of history, it is a lot easier to understand how they got away with everything that they did, because this not small but unique group of people were in charge of delivering the entire baby. It wasn't like it was piecemealed and they just took advantage of different pieces along the way. It was an actual birthing process that they collectively did together. Miles?
Yeah, it's been an interesting holiday. So before the holidays, when you were going on your Panamanian rant, a couple of them.
Yes.
All of a sudden, I saw a Panamanian space. And I was like, what? How would that pop up on the algorithms? Well, I was following the host. And I went, I can't remember when I followed her, but she's Panamanian. And I was listening. I mean, they were speaking in, Spanish and English, but it was funny. I put the text on, and it was actually translating it into English for me. So I picked up quite a bit, and this woman was well connected as far as her. I was amazed at her grandfather, how he was connected to all this stuff that we were talking about. And so it was very interesting. And but I don't know if it's hard to say if these people are on the good side or the bad side. But because, they start talking about this right away after Trump mentions it. But they were saying that they want us to come back. So, and take over because, all these people that they're dealing with are just criminals.
So again, you have to make a distinction between the fact that they have a fairly new president and the way their government had been ran in the past, because their government had been ran as a stooge of the United States. And it was us that overthrew. We basically put Noriega in charge. And then when he started cozying up too close to Israel, we overthrew him too. And so there's absolutely no denying that Panama has been destabilized, but it was destabilized as a result of the United States. And to then think that the answer to the United States destabilizing Panama is to ask the United States to come back in my opinion, is ludicrous. But that's my opinion. I do know that there are people that are hired by destabilization experts, we'll leave it at that, to come in and make claims of what people want collectively in a country that has no relative basis for actually what the people in the country want. I think it is clear that the people of Panama want a government that is not corrupt, like we all do. But inviting the United States in with one of the most corrupt governments in the entire world is ludicrous. I mean, come on. Who the hell believes that? Until we prove that our government isn't corrupt and we fix our own corruption, our government shouldn't be going anywhere because they're a bunch of gangsters.
One other thing I might add, Colonel, out of these national security directives, I think we've updated the directive now to include terrorists. So it's not just communists.
So we had to. The communists went away in 1991. We had to change it to terrorists. That's what I'm telling you. That makes my point. That is the entire Operation Gladio. We don't give a crap what that dangling participle thing is. It's going to always be there. And if we supposedly somehow tomorrow all of the quote unquote terrorists disappeared, we'd have another word to put in there.
MAGA, they call them MAGA. Remember, they were trying to say that people that loved our country and God and Jesus.
Yeah, Christians will be on the list in a minute.
They were saying that we were the ones that, the Trump supporters and the Republic people, people that believe in Republic and stuff like that. Doesn't matter the party, it's just that part of it.
Right.
Nationals, we are the terrorists. Remember, that's what they were trying to push.
Yes, you're right. I mean, that's my point. It doesn't matter. I mean, they called us domestic terrorists for a reason. Because a terrorist. So they couldn't just call us disgruntled Americans. They couldn't just call us dissatisfied people or whatever. Insurrectionists. They have to label you a domestic terrorist because then you are covered under that operational guidance, which means they can do all of those things to you. And don't tell me that the CIA doesn't operate inside the United States. We've disproven that repeatedly, as y'all all know. So
the thread that you wrote up, I think yesterday, I believe it was, well, last few days, and how you threaded them together, has really laid out how the whole creation of Panama in the first place was never an organic thing. It was always an instrumented thing.
100%.
Yeah.
It was the exact same scenario of Katanga. We want this. And we want it because it's going to make the oligarchs and the international syndicate rich. And so we are going to do whatever we have to do in order to take this land. And if you get in our way, we'll kill you. And that's literally what they did in Katanga. And that is what they did by creating a country out of whole cloth called Panama. And what I love is I have been in spaces and listened to people say, and I mean, these are people that have like letters after their name and they're on governmental staffs as consultants. You can't change, and this is obviously in relation to Ukraine. You can't change. You have no authority to change international boundaries. And every time they say that, I bust out laughing. I'm like, what the hell are you talking about? Anytime, anytime they want to change an international boundary, they do it with the stroke of a pen and a few guns. We've done it more than I would ever care to acknowledge. And we did it post World War II whenever it became convenient. I mean, for God's sake, if you look up after World War II, the stupid creation of Pakistan and East Pakistan, which, by the way, now is Bangladesh, we've done it all the time. And like I said, we did it with Panama. We did it with, obviously, that was not beforehand, but we did it with Katanga afterwards in the 1960s. So, yeah, we do it whenever it's convenient.
Whenever we find resources that we want to exploit.
That's not conveniently available to us.
And anybody stands in our way, the very next thing is drawing new boundaries and installing a new dictator. And
pretty much.
The other part that just blows my mind is they never, you know, they oftentimes in these declassified documents, they say one that is friendly to the United States. It's not about being friendly. There's a million people in that country, or of the native people of that region, that they could have installed. It's one specifically that is cruel and brutal and manipulatable by whatever dark forces are attempting to orchestrate all of these moves.
Yeah. Yeah. I wanted to let you guys know, I got a text from Alpha, since we are not doing our Alpha Warrior thing this week. I will be on the sit rep tonight with CanCon and Alpha. And we are going to talk Panama and Greenland, just so that you guys know. So please tune in and be in the chat. I'd love to see you guys. Miles, go ahead.
Well, this person that I was talking about, Sarah from Panama, I think I started following her during COVID, during the injection thing. So it had nothing to do with politics at the time.
Right.
So, but I'm going to keep talking to her because I don't know if she's telling the truth, but it seems like they were well connected down in that region. And so, but also you kind of brought up a good point that we've kind of decided that if we want someone's resources, we can just go take them. So have things changed where we're actually going to make deals with people like Denmark for, well, I don't even know, do they really own that whole island or Greenland?
So Denmark, it is basically a possession of Denmark, and they recognize Denmark as their, so Denmark gave them some autonomy about 20 years ago, much more autonomy than they had prior to that, but they still are responsible for the administration and the foreign policy of Greenland. So they're still recognized as the the
Well, don't
authority.
give away all the information that you're going to talk about on sit reps. So you're not going to talk about this part of the world. What's with this treaty in Antarctica? Can't we get rid of that and just use their resources down there?
Oh, well, according to law, we can get rid of any treaty. And that's why I think it's hilarious that they were trying to pin Trump into saying, if we have a signed treaty, you can't do anything with it. And then out of the same corner of their mouth, they're like, oh my God, Jimmy Carter gave up Panama, which is hilarious because the new negotiated treaty that Jimmy Carter signed was actually confirmed by the Senate. So don't tell me Jimmy Carter did something when you had an entire body of Congress that he supposedly could not have adopted a new treaty giving control of the canal back to Panama without, and it was done by a new treaty, by the way. And he had to have had that treaty signed off on by the Senate, which they did. They confirmed the treaty. So if you want to understand how our government operates, you have to be able to call these people out when they say things that are not true. And I don't care who they are. It was not Jimmy Carter alone that quote unquote gave the Panama Canal back. It was done via a treaty, and the Senate confirmed the treaty. So there. Stellar, go ahead. I lost Bridget again.
Oh no. I was going to say, don't forget the North Pole either, because China and Russia supposedly, wink, wink, as far as that. And I'm sure that there's a lot of resources up there too, wink, wink. And that's more of what I'm concerned about. I want to go to the North Pole. I want to go in that hole that Alan Bird was talking about.
I don't want to go anywhere where, as far as the eye can see, all you see is snow. I'm a green person, and I don't want to go there. But I will help you in any way, Stellar. Miles, go ahead.
Okay, so I'm going to bring up a name. Colonel, are you familiar with Will Steger? You ever heard of that name, Will Steger?
No.
He put on, my dad knows him. My dad did know him. He put on an expedition to the North Pole on snowmobiles. And these were like the, new technology snowmobiles. They were pretty rough. They actually had to have a blowtorch and put them in the carburetor to even have them start up. It was so freaking cold up there. So, yeah, he did make it to the North Pole. But I guess what I wanted to bring up was, it seems like this Trump's cabinet and also the people that he's lining up with technology, this fits into what they're talking about, especially if you're working with quantum computing. If you know how they work, that they have to be super, super cold. I mean, they would save some money by having them, like a base in Greenland or Antarctica to have these computing power. So I just see that some of this technology, it just makes sense that they would want to have certain resources from those areas and just utilize the weather at the same time.
So, Miles, that's brilliant. I know, Bridget, I see you. I've sent you the there you go. I've sent you the co-host thing like 3 times. I think that we should locate all the tech people to the North Pole. And we can just, and so they say Antarctica is a joint venture for the good of mankind, right? So let's put all of the AI shit there. Let's put all of the tech people there. And then we don't have to worry about changing American culture. We don't have to worry about importing all of the people. We have no issue with migration. We're just going to put them all down. Like you said, it's energy efficient. You know, they're all into the green shit anyway. So it'll take a whole lot less to keep their uh, facilities cooled. And what about crypto, Stellar? Can we just put all the crypto miners down there too?
Yeah, because that's one of the things that they have concerns with it, that it overheats and it's so cold there, so it could probably keep it naturally warm.
There you go. So we've just solved everything. Let's use the Antarctica Treaty to locate all of the high tech things so we don't have to worry about the immigration issue into any one country. We're just going to co locate them all there and do all of the AI shit there. We'll do all of the crypto mining there. And it'll save us a lot of money because green and all that other crap.
And it'll keep them warm because of all the because that's what they have to use the or the mine. I guess they have the mining under the dams for the hydroelectric or whatever to keep it cold and all that stuff. So Antarctica, now we're making it warm, green, and everything for them, and they can farm and just be happy little creatures there.
Well, come on, guys. Look, we should take Iceland. I mean, 80% of the people who live in Iceland are alcoholics.
No, no, no. Iceland's the exact opposite. It's Greenland that's the alcoholic one. The names are the backwards. Greenland is the one that's super cold.
That lives on Greenland.
But they're the ones that are all the alcoholics.
Rock.
But I know we have a base there. Nobody ever talks about our military base on Greenland.
Thule, Greenland.
That's where they should put the second Gitmo. And forget about putting it underground and just leave the bars open so they freeze to death, those little parasites.
They actually used Greenland for rendition flights.
Well, what about Diego Garcia? I mean, that's in the middle of nowhere. How are you going to get off that island? It's almost like Devil's Island that the French had. Well,
there's a lot of people that all of the indigenous people were kicked off of Diego Garcia. So that's another one of those territorial conquests of the United States where we went in and decided that we were going to put shit that we didn't want anybody to see, kind of like they did to Martha out on Area 51, and said, you know, all of you people that think this is your island, you all now have to leave. And they forcibly relocated everybody off of Diego Garcia, all in the name of quote unquote national security.
Have you ever been there, Colonel?
I have not. I know lots of people that have been there.
Oh, okay. You ever been to Guam?
No. My next door neighbor went there. His dad was active duty. And I went to school with his dad. Yeah, they went to Guam.
If they get too many people on Guam, it'll tip over, you know?
Yes, yes, I know. Yeah, that's sad. That's probably true with any island, though, you know? You have to have balance because it's not like it's moored to anything like Earth. People in Congress are so freaking retarded. I swear to God.
He's still there, too.
I know he is.
Down in Georgia.
I know he is. He's retarded. It's so depressing that those people are actually in Congress. They obviously don't have an IQ test for that. But anyway, I don't know what's wrong with Bridget. They're just like attacking her, I guess. What's up, Bridget? I don't know if she can even talk. They keep taking her down from being the co-host.
Well, just keep an eye on the USD tether, because that's how they manipulate a lot of stuff, and that's like the Federal Reserve. When you say printing, they mine the the dollar, and so that in Europe is being ceased and it's being delisted as we speak from other ones as well. So that's the end of the Federal Reserve, because that was their mining thing.
So Stella, I have a question for you. So we have 12 branches across the country of the Federal Reserve. Will they be closed? I have one in Minneapolis. And the reason I bring it up is because during the George Floyd riots, when the National Guard came in and they were supposed to stop things. They got deployed to other areas, not where the riots were. They went over to protect the Capitol in St. Paul, Minnesota, and the Federal Reserve in downtown Minneapolis. There was nobody there.
Well, but we were told that was your governor that did that, and they were directing them so they could say that they mobilized them, but they were detailed to places that didn't matter. And remember the conversation with the one daughter that she was giving everybody warning of where they were going next. Go ahead, Stellar.
I was going to say, I went through a divorce and I had to finalize some things with the IRS back in 2020 and 2021 because anyway, the Federal Reserve ended up getting absorbed into the U.S. Treasury, U.S. Department of Treasury. And because like my mail in the beginning was Federal Reserve IRS type of thing, IRS stuff. And then later it just, the mail, the heading on the envelope and even the letters were just, U.S. Department of Treasury. So I think that it already got absorbed in, and, for whatever reason, it's still the Treasury because the tether that, the USDT tether that was mined and stuff that was, and that like a couple weeks ago, they did like $1 million or $1 trillion or $2 trillion, and it pumped up all the markets, especially because remember how I said, for someone to buy something, or for the prices to be as high as they are, someone has to buy it. So they've been really trying to pump up people like you and me to buy the Bitcoin as it goes up. And they're saying, oh, it's going to go up to 200,000 or $1 million. They're trying to get people to do that. But in actuality, it's the institutions and whoever has things pegged to it that are trying to sell it at that, because that's how they take money. They do that in the stock market and the other one. And so it was pumped up through Tether, which is just like the Federal Reserve note that's not backed by anything. And Europe on January 1st, it doesn't match their criteria with so they can't use the USDT, which was the stable coin that the dollar was. So like a couple weeks ago, the RLUSD, which is backed by XRPs and, and that stuff with, and with the ISOs, Paxos and FedNow, everything's, by March of 2025, that whole system's going to be built out. It has to be on ISOs. We're in the end game. So the rest of the stuff is being cleaned out, but the Treasury, USDT is going to be no longer listed or using pairing matches and stuff like that. So the USDC, which is on Stellar ISO, and the RLUSD ISO, and then pretty soon we'll have the Hedera HUSD ISO. So the war is also going on within that. So I do believe that the Federal Reserve and all that stuff is actually really gone. And hopefully Tether, which has never been audited like the IRS and the Federal Reserve has never been audited, they will be audited because they're coming down. Does that make sense?
Yeah, thank you, Stella. How did your parents know all this to name you Stella?
My name is Sharon, and I use
That's
Stella
not her
because
name.
Stellar Lumens
I'm
are
kidding, Stella. I'm kidding.
So Miles, your job is to find out geographically, marketing wise, what can go in that building in about 6 months. Bridget, go ahead.
It's a beautiful building right on the river.
There you go. Well, it'll be available soon. Bridget, go ahead.
Well, yes, I am. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay. Thank God. Good Lord. Okay, so, yeah, I'm under attack, and I did also find out that X had an update. So in the process of it blowing me out of here, and there was a gal that had requested a mic, and it would not let me give it to her. So anyway, space under attack again. Just saying. More and more truth coming out, more and more people seeing and understanding. But my question was for Stellar. Stellar, really, since the Fed is the only thing that backs the dollar, and nothing really backs crypto. Aren't they the only difference is that one is got printed paper and the other one doesn't?
So the dollar, as we know at the Federal Reserve note, for the movement of money, it's tokenized. It's been tokenized for decades. So whenever you use a debit card or a credit card or any of that stuff, they've already tokenized the dollar. And what was being used as the stable coin, because we did not have a CBDC coin, which there aren't any, but some countries may end up choosing to go that route. But we will not have that. Donald Trump made perfectly clear that it would not be a CBDC coin. Now, I do believe that they're going to be coming out with a treasury note once we go through the flip and our money is backed by something backed by gold for us to be able to transact or anything like that in the future. That's what's happening is, BRICS is ready to go. Russia, China, all of them are ready to go. Their payment systems were the only things that they had, were finishing up on. So that's one of the reasons why they were still using the SWIFT system. It's the on and off boarding, the conversions and all that. They're all set up. And how the world is moving, these ISO 20022 tokens, which are the XRP, XLM, XDCs, these different ones that are all those, because of the blockchain, you won't need to have to move these into, there's no mining for them. And because they won't have any more, that's it. And they're the ones that's the native token. So it's the bottom layer of what the entire system of information, financial, internet, telephone, it's everything. Hedera and Google have stakes with each other, which, the banks and stuff like that are using Ledger. And I spoke with my bank today, and they're getting ready for the revaluation. So there's a lot of stuff that's really happening behind the scenes. But January is going to be a big day because Tether will not be traded in pairings, and they're already breaking the pairings off as we speak within the exchanges. But that was how money was being moved, and Tether is how they inject, as you say, it's nothing, there's nothing backing it. And the ISOs cannot be that way. The movement, the transference and everything is documented. It's validated. It's completely a different system, and it does not use it doesn't use as much energy. Now, whether or not, I'm sure that they'll figure out ways to maybe wrap it, because Bitcoin, say, has a lot of the liquidity, but how X is, I look at Tether and Bitcoin is a crime scene. There's good stuff in there, but there's a lot of really dark stuff in there, and there's stuff that's been pumped in that has no valuations whatsoever. It's literally a Ponzi scheme.
Okay, Miles?
Colonel, this is a question for you, if you know the answer. I would like some clarification. So, if the National Guard is deployed and that Guard commander, once he gets his orders and is following through on that in a situation, is he in complete authority of that event and what is happening? Because I've heard that once that happens, the governor can't change what's going on at that point.
So
he's got complete authority, but I don't know if that's true.
No. Okay. No commander in any military unit anywhere has complete authority and doesn't report to a boss. None. So in the National Guard hierarchy, they have two statuses. They have one to be on state duty, Title 32, and one to be on federal duty, Title 10. And those are just the national laws that apply, Title 32 or Title 10. If a guard mobilizes, if a governor mobilizes the guard for whatever scenario, to guard the border as Texas did, or to respond to a hurricane, whatever, the governor is the commander of the National Guard. He has an adjutant general of the state that's usually a 2-star general that is the the military commander, but he reports to the governor. They are never outside while on Title 32 status, outside the command authority of the governor, period. Or that 2-star for that matter, because Title 32 basically says that they are doing duty inside their state. Now, in order for a guard unit normally, and there are caveats to this, to go outside their state and perform duty, they are normally in a federalized Title 10 status. Normally, there are exceptions. And as a result of that, they fall under, and because they are on active duty, they are administratively tied to their guard unit, but that guard unit does not have command authority over them once they're federalized. So after 9/11, we had federalized guard members that had been mobilized that forward deployed to like places like MacDill, where I was at U.S. Central Command, and they performed duty. And while they're on active duty, they're under the operational control of the active duty commander to which they're attached for duty. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. But one more question, quick. So just recently, the National Guard had their 388th anniversary. So I'm doing the math here. So were they part of the British Guard in the colonies? I don't understand how our National Guard could celebrate that birthday at 388.
So the militia in the colonies, the Guard claims credit for the existence of the militia that were part of the colonies. Now, you and I would say that the National Guard, as it relates to the United States, cannot have a birthday longer than the United States has existed. But no offense intended, the National Guard and their leadership are a very unique group of people, and they don't necessarily adhere to things that you and I would think are correct. And you are absolutely right in saying that any military entity of the United States can only have a history that dates back to the beginning of the United States. But they do claim credit for having been part of the state militias prior to that.
Okay, I get it. Thank you.
Sure. Oh. I spent way too much time at the Pentagon with the National Guard, and especially when we were doing the military personnel system, and so many aspects of the National Guard being very different than even the Reserve, which of course then is different from active duty. And so it is a very unique setup, very unique indeed. So, anybody else? Y'all are good. Flipped over 6 o'clock and we're done. I love it. All right.
Well, I just want to tell everybody, Colonel, that I appreciate all of you, love y'all, and I hope you all had a very wonderful Christmas. I did get one of the best Christmas gifts I ever got this year.
Okay, what's that?
Look it up. It's called a Smarties pistol. The Smarties candies, it's a pistol that actually shoots them.
Is it made out of candy?
I have one of those. I got to have one of those.
Is it made out of candy?
Yes, ma'am.
Oh, good grief.
Oh my gosh, I love those. And you can shoot them too?
Why did they make that after I stopped eating Smarties? Sweet Tarts are like my favorite candy ever.
No, Smarties are sweet tart.
I know. I love Smarties.
Now we have a use for them.
Yeah, because I can't eat them.
But you can shoot them.
But now I can shoot them.
Does that mean there'll be a run on ammo when RFK gets in? Just saying.
Well, there's probably going to be a lot of them.
Those are the best.
Yeah. Yeah, I have lots of stories about, because I was the one person that always had sweet tarts on my desk, or Smarties in my candy jar. And people would go, "Do you not eat chocolate?" And I'm like, "No." Why would you eat chocolate when you can have sweet tarts? And of course, eventually they had sweet. Oh my gosh, you did remind me something, SR71. So I went to Sam's like 2 days before, because they have these huge big pieces of salmon that I like to put out for finger food. And I dashed in there. I'm walking down, like I know exactly where the salmon is, because that's about the only thing I buy in there. I'm walking through the main aisle, and I look over to the right-hand side. Do you know they already have their Valentine's displays with Valentine's candy out in Sam's 2 days before Christmas?
Now, I have to admit, I am kind of a big fan of that because my husband and I were married on Valentine's Day.
I don't care. It's December.
You're right.
It's December.
Earlier and earlier.
It's ridiculous. But the one thing I will say that I loved about the whole sweet tart concept is that every holiday came out with their own version of sweet tarts. Because of course you have, for Easter, you had all of the little like ducks and different sweet tarts. And then for Valentine's, you had a whole different bag of sweet tarts, which were hearts and all kinds of different things. And so, yeah, but I don't eat those anymore.
I was supposed to add here that Cousin Annette was blocked for a week, but somehow or another she must be ghosting again, because I see her in the audience.
She was what? She was.
I see Cousin Annette.
She was blocked?
Yes, ma'am. She was thrown off of Twitter for 6 days or 7 days, essentially, total. I know you might find that hard to believe there, Trump Frog.
Cousin Lit.
Well, she appears to be in the audience, so I don't totally understand. But
maybe it's just her ghost of Christmas past.
Yeah, right? Right?
Oh my gosh. That's so crazy.
So over-targeted. You guys are always over-targeted with everything.
Yeah. All right. So I think again, we will be on Badlands Sit Rep tonight with King Khan and Alpha, and we'll be back here tomorrow at 4. So
What time is the show?
I want to say it's 9.
Central or
No, Eastern time. I don't do Central. It's only Eastern.
Oh, I get it. You're in Florida. The rest of us don't. We don't exist, really.
So the left coasters, that's the 6 o'clock, 9 o'clock for the right coasters, right?
Yeah. Yeah. I'll post and a notice once we get off here just to confirm the time. But yeah. All right. Thank you guys for being here. I appreciate it. We will and tomorrow, more hamster, 1 o'clock East Coast time for our Secret Society's Bush Family expose. And then we'll be back here at 4. And then we'll go into another weekend. So thanks, everybody. See you then. Bye. All right, so let me look on here. I don't know if Donnie Vision is still on here. He had said something about tunnels. No, I wasn't allowed to take pictures or anything inside them. Let me look for the rail guys. I know there's some public knowledge. Okay, Donnie Vision, if you wouldn't mind adding me on X so that I can see that, I'd love to be able to look into that before we go live, because I do know there were underground bases, one specifically for missiles up in Greenland that I'd like to have handy if we can find it. I'll look as well, but I appreciate the information. Thanks everybody for being here, and join Badlands Sit Rep tonight, and hope to see you guys in the chat there. Take care. Bye.